Hello and welcome back to the Villa Filler podcast. I'm here as always with my good friend Dan Wiseman. Dan, it's September 2nd. We thought we'd let the dust settle on transfer deadline day. Of course, the window was slammed shut at 7, but you've always got the deal sheets that are submitted late. But we wanted to come to you guys with a full picture of Villa's deadline day. And I mean, there's so much to talk about, mate. I'm sure we could have a 3-hour podcast here, but we're going to try and do our best to keep it to around 30 minutes. Before we get into that, mate, how are you doing?
Very well, mate. Very well. Yeah. You know what? Normally, deadline day is not a headline event for us as Villa fans, is it? Normally, we're kind of the quieter clubs who usually sit and wait and hope more than an expectation. But yesterday was a real counter to that. And, I guess fair play to Unai, to Damien, to Monchi. They'd been promising us a crazy end to the transfer window. And for some good, some bad reasons, a crazy end of the transfer window we did receive. So, yeah, I'm excited to dive into it, mate. There's kind of so many layers to this that I think we'll do well to remember them all. To be honest with you, when you go from the Paqueta saga,
Oh my God, yeah.
right through to last night and the will we, won't we on Elliott and Sancho, it's been a hell of a 48 hours. So, yeah, combined with the pandemonium that was Sunday night's game, pretty eventful last few days.
I think it's safe to say we needed this deadline day after what happened in that Crystal Palace game. That was nothing short of a disgrace. And I don't even know if I want to talk about that, mate, to be honest. I'm sure everybody's eager to hear our thoughts, but I don't think to kind of give my 2 sentence analysis, I don't think that it has been this bad in the Emery era. And here's to hoping it doesn't get any worse and that this is rock bottom. I mentioned in the last podcast, we usually have maybe those 2 or 3 game runs where we have some unfavourable results and performances and we generally bounce back. Hopefully that's the case with this international break. We can regroup. But yeah, I think that's all we need to that is all I'm willing to talk about with Crystal Palace, mate. Maybe we revisit that in the break. But Jadon Sancho. This, I mean, is he like the oldest 25-year-old ever? Because he's been around for a very long time. Obviously, from early days at Manchester City, catching headlines to moving to Borussia Dortmund. He's had his failed move to Manchester United. I think, the jury's probably still out on his loan spell at Chelsea last season as well, albeit, as a part of that Conference League winning squad and did play a fair amount. Um, this is uh, this is an interesting one, mate, because it's a position that needed addressing in that sort of left side attacking 10 role, with JJ departing. But we've been crying out, mate, for months. We need pace. We need directness. I think with Sancho you get directness, but he's not the quickest of players, is he, mate? And that's like you can kind of get away with that in the Bundesliga. And I think, like Bailey, somebody who's obviously had like ups and downs at Villa, but like the one thing that, always kind of gave you and I hope that he would be a success in the Premier League and did contribute to his successful moments in the Premier League was his pace. Like Sancho, if you look at his highlight packages from his Dortmund days, he's kind of just firmly camped on the halfway line and he's just waiting for a ball over the top. And obviously, he's going to be quicker than most centre halves or fullbacks in the Bundesliga. That's just a given. But in the Premier League, we've not seen that lightning pace that like we need, and I don't necessarily think he possesses. So I'm kind of conflicted about this one, mate.
I mean, deja vu, right? This feels just like January did when, we sat down and talked about Marcus Rashford. It's a very, very similar situation. It all depends on the version of Jadon Sancho that you're getting. I think the main reason, I think I speak for both of us here, mate, the main reason I'm surprised to be sat here talking about Jadon Sancho is nothing to do with his style of play or his pace, or it's the wages, right?
Yeah.
He is one of the highest paid players in the Premier League. Reports of a contract that goes up to £350,000 a week. I'm not sure what the final figure is, but one thing that does seem to be checking out across a variety of different journalists is that we're covering up to 80% of those wages. which, no matter which way you stack it up, is pretty expensive with loan fees and bonuses and all of that on top. This is a pretty expensive transfer for Villa, a pretty expensive transfer. And so, yeah, it's an interesting one. I think with all of these deals, bar maybe Harvey Elliott, I think they are deals that get done late in the window. I don't think Jadon Sancho would have been our priority number one signing going into the window. I think the kind of finances this, I think it's fair to say that they're probably not ideal. I think your Evan Gessons of the world are probably the kind of player that we were hoping to try and pick up. But I am warming to it. I was really not that keen. The loan spell to Chelsea doesn't fill you with confidence. You have to hope that he comes here with this kind of mentality and, drive and will to work that by all accounts, that Marcus Rashford did. There's a few journalists saying that Rashford was pretty keen convincing Sancho to make the switch, which is pretty cool. And so, yeah, I think when you see it through the lens of Sunday night, can anybody listen to this podcast say hand on heart that Jadon Sancho doesn't help that performance? Certainly gives us another option, certainly gives us another body in those wide areas. Is he better than Leon Bailey? I would say yes. So in that kind of like for like, does it offer a direct upgrade? I would say so. The numbers over the last few years actually don't stack up. Whilst that feels like a crazy thick question to ask, is Jadon Sancho better than Leon Bailey? When you look at the numbers over the last few years, there's not a huge amount of difference. And so, yeah, I'm gonna obviously give it the benefit of the doubt and see how it goes. I think he'll be one that, as I say, when you look at how Marcus Rashford first turned up on those first few games in a Villa shirt, if Jadon Sancho can bring that kind of energy, I imagine he'll be on a very similar trajectory to the one that Rashford was on. But we have him for a whole season, whereas we only had Marcus for 6 months. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to it, mate. I have no idea what I'm going to get, but I'm looking forward to it all the same.
Is this an Emery special, mate? The classic. Let's take you in. Let's prepare the damaged goods. Like, let's give you a home. I think that's something that Sancho probably needs. Like, I think there were aspects of this move that just feel like they make sense in terms of, like, he probably needs to be a step down from your Chelsea's or United. He needs to be away from that kind of spotlight and pressure and news. And even when Rashford came, like, to a certain extent, that did follow him, and the club protected him from as much of that as they could. But with the utmost respect to Jadon Sancho, he isn't Marcus Rashford, so there won't be that same kind of media scrutiny. That's not to say that there hasn't been, because obviously we're all aware of what happened after that Euros final. But it's obviously I don't think it's been on the same level throughout his career as Marcus and the kind of things that he's had to endure from the British press.
Yeah.
But with that being said, like, I want people at the club who want to be at the club. I think that's not a controversial opinion, and we'll get onto that later on, I guess. But I think, as you said, I don't think we would have necessarily been Sancho's first choice, but I think the desperation's maybe not the right word to use, but that kind of feeling of having, with the transfer strategy waiting late, he had a move to Fenerbahce that he didn't fancy. He had a move to Roma that he didn't fancy. This is obviously a way better move for him, probably financially, and in terms of, keeping yourself in the Premier League, keeping yourself in the England picture ahead of a World Cup. I think, there'll be a bit of a chip on his shoulder. I think there'll be a bit of a point to prove, exactly like there was with Marcus Rashford. So, in that respect, I'm excited to see what comes of this. Although, that optimism is pretty, cautious on my end. I think, we were both kind of the same with Rashford. We were like, oh my God, I can't believe we've signed Marcus Rashford. And then the next thought was, oh my God, how is this going to work? What is going to happen here? Nobody could have really predicted what happened, if we're all being totally honest, just because of the giant cliff of form that he fell off over the past 18 months. So, Sancho has the chance to do something pretty special here, and that's what I like about this deal. And yeah, I'll never get my head around the financials, especially with all of the things. Are we playing with fire here again? Is this irresponsible? Quite possibly. But then when you look at somebody like a Harvey Elliott, Capology, which you don't know how accurate that is, but they have his base salary at around 40 grand a week. So you'd imagine we're probably paying him, let's say 80. You gotta entice him, you gotta make him want to come. That's obviously a fraction of the cost of somebody like a Jadon Sancho. And Elliott is a player that is, probably following that upwards trajectory after a really good under 21s Euros. I'm surprised he's waited till the deadline day for a move. Although I do feel like I remember seeing a lot of stuff last season in and around the Champions League, mate, where, he came on at the Parc des Princes, he scores that goal against PSG to give Liverpool the 1-0 lead in their tie. Obviously, they eventually went out and we played PSG, but I remember around there, the whole narrative around Harvey Elliott was, like, you're a boyhood Liverpool fan, you love the club, you're not playing a lot, like, what's the deal? Like, what's the next move for you? And him being very keen to stay and fight for his place at Liverpool. Context obviously changes that, doesn't it? Because Liverpool have gone and signed about 55 world-class players in the transfer window, and circumstances then of course change. But this is a really exciting deal for us, mate, I think. And obviously he's a young chap. I think he's only 22 years old still. This seems like a no-brainer. I think there's some conflicting reports on the deal. Jacob Tanswell saying that it's a loan with an obligation, which everybody's reporting. Liverpool say it's around 35 million. Villa say it's somewhat less, and there's also reportedly a buyback clause and a sell-on clause in there, that benefits Liverpool. Either way, if there's a buyback clause and it's like 40 mil or 45 mil, I think if you get like 2 or 3 years out of Harvey Elliott, like balling out, like, we know he can, this is like a no-brainer really for the price.
Probably is a bit of a glorified loan, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really? It's kind of a way of basically structuring a 2 or 3 year loan deal that financially offers both clubs great security, in that Villa know that, a string of good performances, if we do, I say when we do, obviously, if it is an obligation, make it permanent, that there's a high chance that you'll flip for a profit in a relatively short space of time. And for Liverpool, it offers them the stability of, if Jadon Sancho is the oldest 25-year-old in world football, then Harvey Elliott is definitely the oldest 22-year-old.
Yeah.
For someone that, you can let go now, let him develop, as you say, for a good 3 or 4 years. And when he's still only 25, 26, bring him back for, potentially what will also be then a cut price fee. I think 35 million is a great fee. I really, really do. I think, if we are sat here questioning the financials of the Jadon Sancho deal, I don't think anybody will be on this one. So yeah, really, really like this one. And potentially, like, I think of the two, he's probably going to come in with the higher floor at the moment. I think Sancho's kind of the best version of Jadon Sancho is, don't think it's harsh to say, significantly higher than someone like Harvey Elliott currently. When you look at what he was doing in Dortmund, those numbers are incredible. But I think the base that you're going to get from Harvey Elliott, there's way less risk. I think you're guaranteed a good performer. Every time I see him play for Liverpool, he comes on and impresses. And yeah, I think you do got to give him credit for coming and making this switch, because he could have sat pretty at Liverpool. He could have stayed there and collected a few more winners' medals for various competitions, no doubt, this season, but has opted to go somewhere, a club that do desperately need his help. It's Villa, probably a significantly less attractive proposition than we were 6-12 months ago. And so I really, really respect it. I think there's an element of he's probably not, he's probably got to have some season to put himself in the frame for an England call-up for the World Cup next summer. But it's not an impossibility. It would be some turn-up, given that, I think he's mainly featured for the 23s and stuff like that. But it's not impossible. So it's a calculated roll of the dice from the player and both clubs, I think.
Yeah, I like it, mate. I like it. And do you know what? He's, in the nicest way possible, he's a bastard. And we don't have any bastards. So I want somebody who's going to rattle opposition fans, opposition players, who, again, like, in the best way possible, has a chip on their shoulder and a point to prove and a bit of arrogance. I feel like the team's quite humble. And I think, that is a direct reflection of Unai Emery. And, he's somebody who has probably gone on a bit of a journey himself since arriving in England for the first time, in how to act and all the, and it's not to say that he came to England and was just a knobhead, because he wasn't, but I think he just realised, like, the Arsenal experience changes everything for how you approach the job, you're like all those things. So I think it's nice that we've got a little bit of an arrogant so and so in the team. And he's a winner. He wants to win. It comes from a good place. So I'm really happy with this, mate. I am really happy with this. And then on maybe like the opposite scale of that spectrum, somebody who seems almost too nice is Victor Lindelof. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this one, mate, because this, maybe this being the first deal on deadline day had people a bit like, how is the rest of deadline day gonna go? Like, is this where we're at? Me personally, mate, and I don't know about you, I've never really fully understood the Lindelof like hate train. I've always thought that he's an okay player, and I think that is probably just what he is. I think he is an okay player, and I think I look at the position and that he's going to occupy, right centre back cover. I think, when you look at the games that we're going to play in Europe, the rotation, obviously somebody like Conte, knock on wood, has never really had a serious injury. But, should that ever happen, we've obviously now got somebody who can fit in on that side, and it feels a little bit more natural. We spoke the other week just about how imbalanced it felt with Mings and Pau. So we've got that right sider who can play on the right side. But, he's also played on the left side, and we've also seen him play left back, and we've also seen him play right back. And again, these aren't positions that I'm advocating that we see Victor Lindelof fill. But if there is one thing that is just a through line with all of Emery's transfers, it's versatility. So we've kind of got that with Victor Lindelof, and as an option to either play on a Thursday night or to play either before or after one of those Europa League games, depending on where you are, who you're traveling to, whatever. I think it is a bit of a no-brainer, really, mate.
This doesn't sound like a compliment, but I do mean it in the nicest way possible. Like, I just don't really have any feelings. It's just like, yeah. Do you know, like, I think, naturally there's a bit of trepidation with, when you sign a free agent who's been a free agent all summer and you pick him up on the 1st of September, that is always a little bit like, oh, like, why has nobody else? If this is, such a good idea, why has nobody else? And, there were a kind of, I think it was Fabrizio was saying that there was Everton and I think Fiorentina, and there were a few other clubs kind of knocking around, and so it looks like there were other clubs kind of sniffing around. But kind of a player that I kind of just slipped my mind that was on the market, to be honest with you, but on a 2-year deal, it just feels like good value. And when you look at the kind of form that other Man United players have left and gone on to find at various different clubs, I'm excited to see his Ballon d'Or season. I really am. Victor Lindelof's 25-26 Ballon d'Or campaign is going to be sensational. I'm really looking forward to it. It's a good bit of business. It'll give us some good cover. I think when we saw the kind of, the mismatches that we've had to put butch together at centre half, the kind of, we all, Mings and Powell, their first ever game together being Brentford away, it did feel like we're a little bit short of cover there, particularly when, all it takes is a Konza red card and you're left pretty light. And so, yeah, I think on a 2-year deal, it makes great sense. You can't imagine he's going to command a huge amount of wages. Looks like Robin Olsen endorsed the move as well, which I think is genuinely. I think it's one thing Marcus Rashford like endorsing the club, but Robin Olsen, I think it. I wouldn't have, been too surprised to hear him say that, he left Villa with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, so to speak. We gave him I know he didn't put in some fantastic performances at time, but certainly wasn't a fan's favourite at points during his time at Villa. So to hear him endorse the move was really, really nice, actually. And so, yeah, good bit of business, fundamentally.
Yeah, I don't think you can argue with it. I don't think you can, when you look at the centre back signings that we've made on deadline days gone past. You've got Jan Bednarak, you've got Clement Longley, and we love Clem Dog, but that's the kind of that's the level of where that was. And maybe this deal is a bit more similar to Longley than it is Bednarek, but a body's through the door in a position that needed addressing ish. So hard to complain, mate. Hard to complain. But I think it's time we talk about the big elephant in the room, mate.
And we do complain. Let's get complaining.
What does Redmond think he's doing going to Huddersfield? How dare he? How dare he? The Terriers? What is this? The terrible move. You're supposed to be starting ahead of Watkins, mate. What are you doing? No, of course, we're talking about Emi Martinez, mate. I see. I have a feeling that I'm going completely against the grain in saying I really didn't care if he left or if he stayed, and the manner, air quotes, the manner he went about it, which is the kind of narrative that's being pushed on social media, I just don't really buy into. I'm gonna have to put my tinfoil hat on, mate, for this, because we've had reports from the Athletic saying that negotiations between Emi and United started as early as January, and then you obviously have him crying at Villa Park, final game of the season, all of that stuff. And again, tinfoil hat, call me a conspiracy theorist, all of this kind of stuff. To me, this just makes the most sense given the landscape. I honestly think that in the summer, or maybe even in January, this is the only point of contention, is the timelines don't line up with the initial talks. But I genuinely believe that in the summer, or at some point last season, Ollie Watkins, Morgan Rogers, and Emi Martinez were all sat down by the club and said, look, one of you could leave. One of you could leave because you are the three players that are going to fetch us a fee. I wouldn't necessarily include JJ in that because the United talks, obviously, they've been ongoing for a while. And I do think that if we'd have sold Emi in May or June, for all the PSR deadline scaremongering nonsense, I genuinely do believe that JJ would still be at the club and would have probably, come to a compromise on the salary and all of that kind of stuff. But I think that those three have been told that they could leave if push came to shove and we needed to make a sale. And it's how the reports have been phrased. People saying that Emi is open to a move and Emi wants to move to Manchester United. Well, if you're told that you could leave and you have to assess your options, you're going to obviously be interested in joining the biggest club in the world, which is Manchester United. You can argue Real Madrid in the comments, but it's a redundant argument. I think you could say either, and it's applicable. And for all the people, United shit, not in Europe, blah blah blah. They're probably going to double his wage. And Amarin's not even going to be. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is the harsh reality of football that I think when these kind of transfers, dealings, and sagas happen to your club, it's difficult to obviously desensitize and take those rose-tinted spectacles off and look at it objectively because of all of the good that Emi has done and the platform that we have given him. People are obviously right to feel the way that they feel. I just don't buy into the fact that Emi is desperate to get out of Villa and is desperate to go to Manchester United. I just don't believe that, and I won't believe that. And there's nothing that anybody can say to me unless it genuinely does come out from the Athletic or from Percy or whoever that where they say, yeah, Emi has properly been angling for this, and there's no involvement from the club. There's nothing that anybody can say to convince me otherwise, mate. Am I disappointed that he'd want to leave? Yeah, but do I understand it? Absolutely, absolutely.
I think that's a very balanced way of looking at this, mate. I really, really do. I think I have seen a lot of the business that we've done this summer through the lens of, you take the JJ signing, right? Was kind of painted in a similar light by the media, in that it was like, Ramsey is interested in the move, he wants Newcastle, blah, blah, blah. It kind of feels like we were getting a very similar kind of type of dialogue. And then it's only really when we all saw Tyrone Mings' Instagram story and we went, oh,
Exactly.
maybe there's layers to this. And the more that you kind of go through it, and now, more and more stories are coming out and stuff, it's kind of that, yeah, JJ was very keen to stay, had no real, and it was just kind of not forced upon him, but the club was just not in a position to turn down that kind of money. And by all accounts, was a loved member of the playing squad, was adored by all at Bodymore Heath, was indeed Villa through and through, but was put in a position by the club where it was kind of like, look, like if a bid kind of comes in for you this summer, our hands are tied. And it would be interesting to see what Martinez's side of things is. I do agree with you that I think that similar conversations were probably held with a few different players. None of them have quite developed into this saga. I think that he's ultimately been, the decision to leave him out of the Crystal Palace game was Emery's by all accounts, but I don't think he's benefited from that at all.
I think that makes it worse, right? That makes it look worse. But again, like, here's the thing, and this is where people are losing me with their outrage of this, because, like, and at this point we are led to believe that Emi to United is a viable option, and it's not panned out that way. Emi's not going to want to play to risk injury, to risk the transfer. Even if he did want to play, is he necessarily going to be in the correct headspace? We don't know whether United said to Villa, think you should probably leave Emi out, and Villa were playing hardball. And we don't know whether this was Emery's decision to leave him out, because he gave a pretty interesting interview before the game, with 2-word answers of Marco Bizzo, which probably, as funny as it was, and as part of me thinks, like, fair play, I think we've seen a more prickly Emery with the media this season, because I think he's just absolutely done with these, stupid brain dead questions from the media that he keeps having to answer about PSR and selling players and all that. I don't necessarily think that was probably the right way to approach this. But, so for that, for the fact that it literally, like, there's probably like 10 reasons why he didn't play. We don't know the actual reason. To say, oh, Emi said Emi refused to. We don't know that Emi refused to play. We don't know that for a fact, do we? Which is why I'm also like, I don't think like, oh, Emi, like, you're a dickhead for not playing, because, like, again, like, and my mind will be changed if it comes out Emi Martinez refused to play. That's totally different. But even then, like I said, if he didn't refuse to play, is he in the right mindset to play? No, absolutely not. He's already thinking about moving to bloody Chester. He's looking at his new house. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not like, there's so many factors, and it's easy to get caught up in the reporting and the semantics and all of that. But always try and be as objective as possible. Personally, that's just me, and I just don't think I don't think that Emi's really pushed for a move to leave. I just don't believe it.
I think the biggest thing now, and regardless of what is true and what isn't, the facts are that, and rightly so, a lot of the fan base will have had their views dictated by what has been said in the media, which has definitely painted Emi as, there was that pretty strongly worded. It was in Matt Law. Yeah, the article last night, like, the world's biggest Wally. Like, there's been a lot of pretty ferocious press talk about this, which will have influenced the, general sentiment of the, Villa supporting public. who are pretty anti Emi Martinez right now. I do, regardless of the truth, look at the Instagram story he put up yesterday and was like, come on, dude.
Yeah, that's valid. That's valid.
Let's not, come on now. I just think, like, let's not stoke the flames. His birthday, obviously, today has...
Happy birthday, Emi.
Maybe if it weren't... I was about to say maybe the only other day that would have been worse was yesterday, but I'm not even sure on that, to be honest with you. I think today definitely could have been the worst possible day to have a birthday. But happy birthday to you regardless, Mr. Martinez. And the problem is now is how do we go about this? Because as we've been recording, Fabrizio Romano, and this is the, just to divulge myself for a second, this is the only kind of thing I do feel like ever since, was it The Rest Is Football that Fabrizio gave that interview to, where he was basically like, players and agents will contact him to kind of like, there's been a lot of Emi Martinez talk us about, a lot of it, which I don't think has helped. And we kind of face this situation now where Emi Martinez will be reintegrated, right? All the fans that are saying, he should be frozen out, let him rot, blah, blah, blah. That will not happen, because ultimately it is a very valuable asset and fundamentally the best goalkeeper we have at the club. Whether it's, the goalkeeper that's in the right mindset or not is a different conversation. I think both you and I agree. I personally wouldn't have started him at Brentford. I think following the Newcastle game, I think Bizzo had done everything and more to deserve to hold on to that shirt and stay in the 11. But Emi Martinez will be reintegrated. How we go about doing that will be very, very interesting indeed, because regardless of what the truth is, the fan base believe that Emi Martinez has been flirting with Man United since January. I think his ridiculous sending off at the last game of the season in May has now been somehow, if it was possible, to be kind of looked back on with even more anger, because you're doing that whilst in contract talks with Man United, is really, really going to upset some people. And then, you kind of face this whole saga that's gone on through the summer. The fact that he turned down 2 moves yesterday to Galatasaray, I think that's the interesting bit. That is the interesting bit. There were 2 bids apparently yesterday, the second on better terms than the first, both of which were rejected. That's the interesting part for me. That's what I think has upset a lot of people, is that regardless of kind of what was felt, the opportunity was there. It seems the club were happy to kind of waive that transfer through to go and sign for a different club. And he said no, and I understand why. Fundamentally, it's the same reason we were speaking about why Sancho has come to Villa over Fenerbahce. But ultimately, he is a Villa player and he's going to need to be reintegrated. And I don't think Villa Park are going to take too kindly to that, mate.
See, I think that's why I disagree with you a little bit slightly, mate, because, first of all, this has happened at a great time for Emi because it's an international break. He's halfway around the world with Argentina right now. So there's that, right? There's the time, like, in terms of burying the news, international breaks are always, the clubs announce, especially Villa, bloody hell, all the bad news we've had that's announced during international breaks, it's forgotten about within days. And it might seem counterintuitive because there's like nothing going on, but like that's almost exactly why it gets buried, with amidst all the games as well, it's not come the Saturday the 14th or the 13th, whenever it is, when we travel to the Bramley-Moore Dock Stadium, the Dickens Hill Stadium. If Emi Martinez starts that game and keeps a clean sheet, all is forgotten. And
I totally agree.
People can argue that. Yeah.
Kisses the badge. It's a little Paqueta, right? I'm sure half of the West Ham fan base hated Paqueta, and then he scores and does that celebration. Like, I do totally agree.
We're fickle. We're so fickle. We are. And I'll be laughing, like, again, like, from I think, first of all, I probably should have prefaced this at the start. We're not in the know, right? And we're not claiming to be in the know. Like, look at what Justin did, right? I'm sure you've seen that, mate, with Asensio. We are not in the know. What I just said is purely my opinion, based on the facts that we know. So I think it's important to say that because I don't want to be catching any smoke in the comments about being in the know about this situation, because I am probably the least in the know person when it comes to Emiliano Martinez and his situation. I'm literally just basing my opinion off the facts that I've listed. But I think it's, it's easy to get caught up in this kind of stuff, and it's easy to get emotional. And I understand it, and I don't mean for my opinion or view to have come across as condescending or anything like that. But we don't know anything. Nobody does. You don't. I don't. You listeners don't know. If unless it's coming from Tanswell, unless it's coming from Percy, unless it's coming from even somebody like Matt Law or whoever, it's not, like we can't speculate on what we don't know. I think it's unfair, and this Zoom is about to impromptu end, so I think that's where we have to wrap it up. But it's been a crazy deadline day, mate. I'm sure we'll do a podcast in a few days' time. We should probably do like a tier list of all the signings and stuff like that, and maybe we can talk about this kind of stuff in more detail. But yeah, the reintegration. I think it's as simple as keep a clean sheet at Everton, and all is forgotten. But we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below, guys. Rate this deadline day out of 10. If you listen on Apple, Spotify, download, share, follow, like, comment, subscribe, and up the Villa.